All right, so raw data. Just in case you don't know it, let me show you a trailer. All right, I like to hear that. So thanks very much for being here today. So I'm super excited to talk to you about raw data. I'm the COO, yeah, there's a slip, a COO of Survios. I was actually advising the founders who were quite young at the time, still are, while we were raising our first round of money. And once that investment hit, led by Rob Conybeer at Shasta, who did Next and Dollar Shave Club, among other good exits. They asked me to come on board as COO, and it's been the gig of my life. It's such a pleasure. I spent all of my time sort of like creating the conditions under which Survios can succeed, and succeed it has. So raw data hit early access last summer on Steam, and now we're on Oculus and Vive. And you know, as it was said, you know, we were the first one to hit $1 million in sales. And also, we were the first to become a VR title to top all the Steam charts, not just the VR charts. And for us, that really fits in with our mission, which is how can we, as a premier content creator in VR, evangelize VR and grow it as an overall industry? And that's part of our goal. So the Apex, I mean, the way raw data evolved, it really started out as Bullet Time Apex, which was a game we developed when we were still developing hardware. And the reason I mentioned that we were developing hardware is because one of the secret sauces of Survios, I believe, is that the founders had a very, very, very fixed vision of what they want the user experience to be like in VR. It had to be stand-up. It had to be premium, right? AAA content. It has to have body tracking. It has to have freedom of movement. It has to be you have to be fully immersed in what feels like a real world. And you have to be playing with other people. It has to be social. Right? So we developed hardware at the time because guess what? The hardware didn't exist to deliver that. But now it does, and we're having a great time morphing all the lessons we had from Bullet Time Apex in terms of gameplay mechanics, all the R&D we did to wrap it around a really compelling IP, and we're happy to bring it to the public and launch it. One of the benefits of what we call this active VR, when you're standing up and actually like not just sitting but standing up and moving around, one of the benefits of that, my CEO Nate Berber says all the time is, you know, putting on a headset is a big, you know, can be a big deal for some people. So get their heart racing immediately, and all of a sudden they're immersed, they forget about the headset. So, and it kind of works. There's nothing like being in raw data and having two pistols and your enemies are coming at you from all angles and you're shooting wildly. It is so much fun. And our goal in this game and all our games is really to create overwhelming experiences that when people get through them, they feel incredibly, incredibly accomplished. So let me get into some of the lessons that we've learned doing this. Just to summarize, raw data is a sci-fi shooter. It's got co-op multiplayer, which, by the way, is completely compelling to be working with someone else, see them as an avatar, watch them wave at you as you protect each other against hordes of robots. But it's also got PvP mode as well now, which is cool. We'll launch version 1 fully in the fall, and it'll be on not only Oculus and Vive, but also on PSVR. So I started with customers here because I think it's really important that we always keep customers in mind, and we certainly do. So who are our customers? What have we discovered our customers are in VR? So let's forget TAM, let's forget things like demographics, let's talk psychographics. So we've got Hunter on our team who loves to talk about the 3 Michaels. And in VR he says there's 3 types of players. There's Michael Jordan, there's Michael Jackson, and there's Michelangelo. I need a female Michael so I can add that to the list. I don't mean to just be male focused, but it's a good mnemonic, I think. So Michael Jordan, these are people who are in VR to be and feel like badass heroes. And Michael Jordan is people who put themselves out there, who want to be expressive in VR. And then Michelangelo are people who really want to be the ultimate creator, the people who love Tilt Brush, for example. So the raw data player is clearly, in this model, Michael Jordan. What's one of the early lessons we learned in raw data is we're giving them so much power to wield weapons, swords, et cetera. One of the things we learned is as people are moving in VR, especially with the Vive, all sorts of emergent behaviors come out. And one of the kind of joys about raw data in development was watching the designers try to create the conditions for more expressive behavior. For example, allowing pistol flipping. For example, allowing sort of like pistol whipping a robot. So I mean, all of that has been really fun, and it's amazing to watch people play. It's almost like opera or ballet, actually. So in the home market, what are we seeing exactly in terms of the consumers? Obviously, we're seeing, for a game like this and for the tech that we're looking at, skews male, very high-tech person, disposable income, hardcore gamer, VR enthusiast, and hobbyist. Yet, obviously there are more casual players on the PSVR side, but the home market's pretty much still there. But we know that VR has a much wider appeal. And how do we know that? It's because we've really doubled down on the arcade space. We've got raw data in something like 36 countries right now, and what we're learning from that is enormous. We're learning that the appeal of VR goes well beyond the male gamer, and families come into these arcades to play our game. Instead of going to the movie theater or instead of going to go-karting, they come into the arcades to play virtual reality. Tons of females play. In fact, we just did a big showcase at Caesar's Palace last weekend, and the stories we heard was that all the bachelorette parties came to play raw data, which is hilarious. Actually, it wasn't raw data, it was another game, but it was Play VR. Is our game Sprint Vector they were playing. And it created such crowds that we got, not only was like major female crowds, but also a lot of men came as well. So it's just a proof of the pudding that VR can certainly go mainstream if the conditions are right. So we learned early on that we needed to be customer focused, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of sort of how do you actually sort of like be customer focused in VR. And let's just take ergonomics. And here are two examples of things we learned, which are obvious things, but we had to learn them the hard way by doing it wrong. So for example, we didn't properly account for how people have multiple types of arrangements and multiple ways to configure their play spaces. So for example, very different experience for someone in their den or whatever on the Vive standing up with lighthouses rigged than two cameras at a desk playing with Oculus. In fact, very early in our game, we had a hand scan, and it turned out a lot of our players just couldn't reach the scan with their hand. And of course, we were able to get a quick workaround, but it was a learning that you really do have to create flexibility in terms of how people configure their VR. And then the other thing is loudness standards. We didn't realize at first, we now know fully well that you need loudness standards in VR. How come? Because if you're playing a game on your console or your TV, you have a volume button that's readily available. Same thing on a mobile device. But in VR, that's not the case. You're in VR. You'd have to navigate menus to actually get to the volume control. So really creating sound standards, loudness standards became super important for us, just to give a couple small examples. All right, community management. So in marketing raw data, and I like to think about raw data not just as a developer, but as a holistic business and how we market and everything else. I hope you get something out of that. We had 5 core pillars to our marketing strategy on raw data. One was community management, then PR, then influencers, platform relationships, and content marketing. Those were the 5 things that we think moved the needle. So let's first talk about community. We were laser focused on our community from the day we launched, and we knew we had to be. Our players are VR enthusiasts. They are eager to help co-create their content with us. We needed to nurture that enthusiasm, and we needed to constantly learn from these VR experts out in the field. So for Survios, one of our earliest hires was a community manager. And we talked about, oh, is that necessary at this point? It turned out to be absolutely necessary. We found it really, really useful in growing our community and keeping them engaged to focus in on the community. So for example, what are some things we did? Well, we plugged ourselves into as many events as possible. One of, whether it's E3, GDC, or partner events around the globe, we're there. One of the strengths of Survios is that we really tried to commit to being everywhere. We went, obviously, online. We went to where the fans are. So PC VR gamers are all on Reddit, not so much for PSVR. So we did a lot of effective ad buys with super targeted ad buys to drive people to our Steam page and to Reddit. And it really worked. But one of the more interesting things we've done is we've developed content marketing around raw data. There is plenty of narrative storyline in raw data. It's really rich from a narrative standpoint. But we've decided to take that IP and develop it in other areas to enhance that narrative, enhance that game world. So for example, at Comic-Con a couple weekends ago, we distributed our first raw data comics. We're working with a team called Jump Creative to create this really robust website around Eden Corp, the company that's at the center of raw data. And I guess, why is it important for building narrative outside the game? Well, there's two things I think we've learned. One is, players can't be standing forever in VR watching cinematics. It just doesn't work. So we want to develop the narrative elsewhere as well to make it richer. But secondly, you just get a better ROI developing narrative outside of VR. You're not creating deep story elements in the game as much as you can elsewhere for less cost. So finally, let's talk a little bit about, on this slide, let's talk a little bit about the VR community itself. I've never seen a community of developers more collaborative, more eager to help each other to drive VR adoption and drive VR excellence. And I've sincerely never seen it before. So for example, Rec Room made Saija and Bishop characters from our game themes. No, they did themed outfits. Absolutely amazing program. So in the spirit of cooperation, one of the things we did that we think was quite innovative is that we created this thing called Freaky Fridays. And Freaky Fridays were events live streamed where we would partner with another developer. We did this with Rec Room, Arizona Sunshine, Space Pirate Trainer, Brookhaven Experiment. And their developers would play our game one week, and our developers would play their game another time. And then the high scores that we got, we would then challenge our community of players, each of our community of players, to try to beat those scores. And of course, we'd prize them if they did. And that was just really effective to amplify our audiences and create more engagement. I really, really can't stress how much that influencers move the needle for raw data. At pre-alpha, we distributed keys to 100 YouTube influencers. We garnered a bunch of videos. So for example, 2 of the videos that Node did reached over 1 million views each, which at the time was really good for VR. We often co-host content. We let influencers take over our channels, and they become the hosts of our programming that we create. We did a contest with Smosh Games. They have like 7 million subscribers on YouTube, and we had tens of thousands of entries with them. A few weeks ago, we invited Smosh Games, one of their influencers, to come to us, to an arcade partner we had, and they showed up at the mall, and it became really helpful for driving awareness around the VR arcade. So we have a VIP program where we recognize content creators, people building videos around raw data, and we give them early access to beta builds and things like that to thank them. The big learning from influencers that you need to make it easy. Influencers are super enthusiastic and interested in VR. They quite often don't have access to VR hardware. So a couple of things we do, we bring them regularly into the studio and have them play there. And we'll send hardware to an influencer that we really like. For example, we sent an Oculus Touch to Smosh Games, and it really proved successful for us. Finally, one of the best things we did around influencers is we have a dedicated person working with them. We call this person a professional friend builder, and it's really, really helped us, make sure that we're top of mind on the influencer circuit. I want to talk about key relationships. We invested a lot of time from day one in developing relationships and establishing a footprint with key partners. Those partners include the hardware partners, platform partners, stores, tech partners, Intel, NVIDIA, people like that. All of it really has paid off. The key was in establishing these platform relationships, and a lot of developers don't do this, is it's not just enough to have great content. It really, really helps if you can also show that you're great at promoting your game. So they feel you've got skin in the game in terms of promotion. We share our games super, super early, and I think that's really important to start driving awareness and enthusiasm. Incidentally, one of the things we learned early on in Raw Data was, get your content up on Steam and Oculus as early as possible, because that's the best way to distribute your content, the easiest way. You don't have to deal with FTP servers or installers. So just a little hint from us. We listen hard when partners ask for things. So HTC last weekend asked us to participate in a surfing competition by demoing the game at a surfing competition in LA last week. We were happy to do it. In the end, all of this is for co-marketing deals and also getting featured on the store. And that's the single most thing that will move the needle right now where we are in VR. So when we launched, on launch day with Raw Data, we had literally millions and millions of impressions at launch, tens of millions, and 3/4 of all those impressions came from being featured on the store page. So there's nothing more you could do to move the needle than that. Similar to mobile, I guess. All right, let's talk a little bit about analytics. This has been a real game changer for us. Measuring everything players do in the game has been really impactful for us. And we've moved well beyond Google Analytics to a kind of proprietary solution that's really, really deep and effective. First of all, analytics allowed us to really get to know our customer. Who's playing? What regions are they in? What hardware are they using? We do frame rate monitoring based on hardware configurations. We can determine more easily where we need regional servers based on the analytics we get. It's also led to some significant design changes in Raw Data, all informed by analytics. A lot of our assumptions actually were proven wrong based on data. So for example, we changed the default scheme from sticky to hold on Oculus based on feedback, based on data that we were getting from our Oculus users. Another example, our second level dark source, I'm sounding like a New Yorker, was really, really difficult as it turned out. And we could measure that. At one point, it was so difficult and players were having a hard time getting through that we actually explored possibly moving that level to later on in the game. We didn't end up doing that because we were able to tweak things like the difficulty level default. We were able to increase player health and all that, solve the problem for us. Based on analytics, it was the boss character of all our characters, the boss character that had to have most changes. It had the lowest play rate and he had the highest quit rate. And what we did there is, it was very simple. We removed a cumbersome reload animation, and we also kind of made it easier to snap and use the shotgun. And those type 2 tweaks actually changed the game, and boss is popular now. So analytics don't tell you what the problem is, but they definitely tell you that there is a problem. So the mantra for me is always observe, analyze, make changes, measure, and then analyze for validation of those changes. Let's talk about launch timing and launch in general. So as I said, we're launching V1 in the fall, which means we've been in early access for over a year. That's really a long time. Why did we do that? Well, at that time, there was brand new hardware out there. We wanted to release early, get out there, get feedback right away, and establish our footprint in the space. And it really did pay off for us to do that. The plus side of that is we started to build our community really early on, and we were able to learn from them and such. The downside was the team got overwhelmed with having to do multiple releases for hot fixes and stuff like that to keep the player community happy. We figured it out over time. We started doing bi-weekly, then monthly releases, but it was impacting the overall game development. We pulled back from that, and now we're doing it quarterly. Platform relations are super important. If anyone can launch with hardware, I recommend it. From a PR perspective, we really focused in on press targets. So for example, we use the Game Developers Conference to talk about technology at Survios. We use the E3 to talk about games at Survios. So I'm going to move along. In terms of pricing, premium price points work. God bless it, and they will continue to work as long as the value proposition is quite clear to players. So demos and arcades have been very big for our strategy. The best way to get to know people. The best way to get people into VR is actually give them opportunities to play where they normally wouldn't have one. So we look at every person who demos our games, every arcade customer in the arcades as a conversion possibility from try to buy. Plus, we're doing a lot to just try to be out there showing that VR is cool to grow the overall space itself. So we demo a lot, and all the trade shows, consumer shows, et cetera. We're on the floor at GDC every year. We're in South Hall at E3, and all of that has really helped us. One of the benefits of doing demos is we capture emails when we do that, and we use that as a big database for VR fans and enthusiasts. Arcades, huge thing for us right now. We've really become experts in location-based entertainment installations, and we're working with a lot of partners around the world to kind of get our game into arcades. It's the friction point. It's $10 to play our game in an arcade. That's much less of a friction point than setting up the equipment at home. And for us, it's like, we really bullish on VR, and we think, on arcades, and we think arcades are the way for mass adoption of VR down the road. In some ways, it's interesting. When you watch VR in arcade, it starts to feel more like laser tag than Mass Effect, and we've learned a lot about audiences and how to reach audiences. If you're interested in VR, BBC came out with a consumer insights report, I think a couple of weeks ago. I really recommend you look at that. I thought there were some good insights in it, but one of them was, when you're marketing your game, you got to also market the VR experience. It's not enough to just talk about your game. People need to be educated on what VR is still. And the arcades and seeing consumers in arcades have really driven that point home to us. One of the biggest reasons Raw Data is successful is from the get-go, we doubled down on recruitment. Recruitment of top-class talent is one of the most important things we've done. So one of the things, our strategy basically is we treat recruitment at Survios like a marketing function. So we do a lot to try to raise the profile of Survios by working with groups like Built in LA for online presence, et cetera. But we also have events. Like we had big Women in Gaming International event at Survios to sort of attract good recruits, but also build awareness. The formula for us is have a great product, have a great culture, and recruitment is much easier. It really helps to have a cool space. Come to our office in LA, it's amazing. You're all invited. It really helps with the recruitment. Internships have been key for us. We had 2 summer internships the last 2 summers. Almost all the students came back the next summer, and when they graduate, the students are getting, record numbers of them are coming over to become full-time hires. So it's been really good for us. In terms of passive recruiting versus active recruiting, we do a lot of both. We're very rigorous on the passive recruiting side. We do very big, difficult tests and such in order to make sure that people are good and we're confident in their ability to hit the ground running. Let's talk about optimization. So optimization is an obvious topic, but one that needs to be driven home again and again. We made mistakes in developing Raw Data for sure. We had scope issues. We didn't build certain pipelines that we should have at the time we should have. But one of our biggest learnings was optimization has to happen early and often. The thing is, if you're not hitting 90 frames per second, the player starts to feel uncomfortable. And so it's all about optimization, literally almost everything we do. So the difficulty of that is in VR, expectation for interactivity is so high. So, you have a rifle there. In a video game, you just pick it up and shoot. But in VR, you start to look around it, start examining it, and the level of detail necessary on every piece of art actually really does impact performance. So there's a fine balance between how do you do that. And so the other thing is just like small things like sound, In video games, you got a gun, it makes one sound, and it's just emanating from one source. In a VR, let's take a shotgun. You really have to have sound emitters on multiple parts of the shotgun. So for example, cocking, shell ejecting, pulling the trigger, all of that has a separate sound and is placed within the object, and all of that leads to performance. So we always recommend a test for performance early and often, build optimization in your schedule, treat your QA people really nicely. Okay, lastly, breaking rules. I think one of the things Survios has done well, really well, is that they've bucked up against rules. When we hear a rule, we actively go out and seek to break it. And I would encourage everyone here to do the same. So the common opinion in VR on day one was that you should never take control of the head of the user. Never take it away from the user. Let them have control of their head, or you'll make them feel uncomfortable. We were doing FPS, so you are the headset. So for us, it worked well for us because you're always one-on-one with your head movement. But we started playing around with it, and we did a couple of things that were truly amazing, I think. So for example, we did a lot of innovation around how to locomote. to get to another distance, it's not so click there and you're instantly transported there. We actually have acceleration and deceleration when you land. And that's taking control away from the user, but we do it in such a way that it enhances the gameplay experience and doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. We figured that's out. We do a lot to visualize intended action. So even if we think the player is intending to do something, we'll do things like animate hands to certain objects to make that happen. There's the coolest thing, when you eliminate the Saija, the female sword fighter in the game, we actually shoot you up and ease you down. You completely lose control, but we do it in a way, we figured it out how to do it in a way that actually makes you feel like a total badass and totally cool. So that's raw data, and that's some of the lessons we learned. I just went through quickly, and I hope you have questions. But in terms of breaking the rules, the other rule people said is you can't go fast in VR. And we're breaking that with our second game. The game is called Sprint Vector, and we have players going through massive obstacle courses, extremely, extremely fast, and no discomfort at all. We figured out a way by anticipating movement and developing a technology we call fluid locomotion that makes Sprint Vector a true innovative product based on our tech. So I hope you'll check out Sprint Vector, and I'm happy to take questions if we have time.
We actually are running out of time, but that was amazing. That's 10 incredibly dense and interesting lessons.